Boston never forgives, and those who rule it even less so. But tonight, at 2 a.m, when Dominic Dom Castellano slipped into his own house through the servants' entrance, he didn't know he was walking into his own graveyard. His private jet was supposed to be plummeting into the Atlantic Ocean. His body was supposed to be dissolving in the freezing depths below, and his wife was supposed to be sipping champagne in the arms of the underboss he had trusted for 20 years. But supposed to are the two most dangerous words in the Mafia dictionary, because Dominic was still alive, and the only person who knew it was the maid standing before him in the darkness. Her calloused hands, roughened by years of hardship, pressed against his chest, her amber eyes burning like embers. "Silence," she whispered, her voice cold as steel. "If you want to survive tonight, listen to me." And Dominic Castellano, the man they called the Surgeon of Boston, the man who had never bowed to anyone in 36 years of life, suddenly realized a brutal truth. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one holding the gun. It's the one who has been folding your shirts for the past 3 years. 3 hours earlier, the air in New York had tasted wrong. Dominic Castellano sat at the head of a mahogany table in a private room at the Carlisle, surrounded by the heads of the 5 families. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over men whose hands had signed death warrants and billion-dollar deals with equal indifference. The meeting had gone too smoothly. That was the first warning. Vincenzo Gambino smiled too much. Tommy Lucchese kept glancing at his phone. And when old man Genovese shook Dominic's hand at the end, his palm was damp, clammy, like a man at a funeral who knew something the corpse didn't. Dominic had survived 36 years in this business by trusting his gut more than his eyes. His gut had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and a war with the Russians that had painted the Boston harbor red. Tonight, that same gut was screaming. Something was off. He excused himself at 11, claiming exhaustion. His private jet was scheduled to depart from Teterboro at midnight, carrying him back to Boston. Dante had arranged everything. Dante always arranged everything. But instead of heading to the airport, Dominic slipped out through the hotel's service entrance. He paid cash for a last-minute ticket on a commercial flight to Providence. From there, he called Bruno. Bruno was the only person Dominic trusted absolutely, partially because the man had served the Castellano family for 23 years, mostly because Bruno was deaf and mute from birth. He couldn't betray secrets he couldn't hear. The black Escalade was waiting at the Providence airport at 1:45 in the morning. Bruno signed a greeting, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. Home, back entrance, no lights. Bruno nodded. He didn't ask questions. He never did. The drive to Marblehead took 40 minutes through sheets of rain. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating the Massachusetts coastline in harsh white flashes. The Atlantic Ocean churned and roared to their right, waves crashing against the rocks like the fists of angry gods. The Castellano estate emerged from the darkness like a Gothic nightmare given form. Limestone walls, pointed spires, windows like hollow eyes staring out at the tempest. The mansion had been built in 1892 by a railroad baron who'd thrown himself off the cliff 3 years later. Dominic had always appreciated the irony. His left shoulder throbbed as the car wound up the private drive. 8 months ago, a bullet had torn through the muscle, missing his heart by 2 inches. A gift from Nikolai Volkov, the Russian Bratva boss who'd been trying to expand into Boston. Dominic had returned the gift by sending Volkov his lieutenant's head in a bowling bag. Tonight, all Dominic wanted was a glass of Macallan, a hot shower, and the warmth of Victoria beside him in bed, his wife, the daughter of Senator Harrison Wells, the woman who had transformed him from a feared criminal into a respected businessman in the eyes of polite society. He missed her. Bruno stopped the car near the servants' entrance on the north side of the estate. Dominic stepped out into the rain, instantly soaked. He signaled Bruno to circle around and wait. The keypad glowed faintly in the darkness. Dominic punched in the code. 1988, the year he'd made his first kill. Simple, arrogant, unforgettable. The door clicked open. Dominic stepped inside, and the darkness swallowed him whole. The kitchen was a tomb of shadows. Dominic stood motionless just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning that sliced through the oversized windows, illuminating the space in stuttering frames. A Sub-Zero refrigerator hummed in the corner. Rain hammered against the glass like desperate fingers. He breathed in slowly. Oak, cold steel. The lingering scent of the dinner service cleared hours ago. And something else. Something that didn't belong. His hand drifted to the Glock tucked in his waistband. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. He had killed his first man with a gun just like this one. He had lost count of how many had followed. Dominic moved across the marble floor without a sound. His Italian leather shoes made no noise. 20 years of surviving in a world where footsteps could be death sentences had taught him how to walk like a ghost. The kitchen should have been empty. The staff was dismissed at 10 every night. Victoria would be asleep upstairs in their bedroom. The security team would be stationed at the gates and patrolling the perimeter. So why did every instinct in his body scream that he was not alone? He reached the center island, fingers trailing across the cold granite. His eyes swept the room. Shadows pooled in corners. The pantry door was slightly ajar. The wind howled outside like a wounded animal. Too quiet. The silence pressed against his eardrums. Even the house seemed to be holding its breath. Then a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the pantry. Dominic's hand moved in a blur. The Glock cleared his waistband and locked onto the figure's forehead in less than a second. His finger found the trigger. Muscle memory, pure instinct. Move, and I paint the walls with your brain. His voice was ice, controlled. The voice of a man who had made that exact promise 100 times and kept it every single one. Lightning exploded outside. The flash illuminated the figure for a frozen heartbeat. It was Elena, the maid. She wasn't wearing her uniform. Instead, she had on an oversized gray t-shirt that hung past her thighs and a pair of cotton shorts. Her feet were bare on the cold stone floor. Her dark brown hair was damp, plastered to her forehead and neck as if she had been running through the rain. But it was her eyes that stopped Dominic cold. Amber, bright, burning with something that looked almost like defiance. She was staring straight down the barrel of his gun, and she wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even blinking. In 3 years, Dominic had barely noticed her. She was efficient, quiet, invisible in the way that good servants were supposed to be. He didn't think he had ever heard her speak more than a handful of words at a time. Yes, Mr. Castellano. Right away, Mr. Castellano. Now she stood before him like a different creature entirely. Why are you still here, Elena? His voice came out harsher than intended. The gun didn't waver. Elena's chin lifted slightly, a gesture so small it was almost imperceptible. But Dominic saw it. He saw everything. Put the gun away, she said. Her voice was low, steady, no fear. You're going to need it for someone else. And then she did something that no one had done in 36 years. She stepped forward and placed her hand directly on his chest, pushing him back into the shadows. Dominic's body reacted before his mind could process. He seized Elena's wrist, twisting it away from his chest. The grip was iron, unforgiving, the same grip that had broken fingers and shattered loyalties. This is my house. His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Step back, now. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Instead, she pressed closer, her bare feet soundless on the marble. You walk through that door, she whispered, her eyes locked onto his. And you die, tonight, in this house. Dominic laughed, a cold, sharp sound that held no humor. Are you threatening me, little maid? No. Elena's jaw tightened. I'm saving you. The word hung between them. Saving, as if he were some helpless victim. As if he hadn't built an empire on blood and calculated brutality. As if he weren't the man who made other men disappear. But it was the next word that truly shocked him. Dominic. Not Mr. Castellano. Not sir. Not boss. Dominic. In 3 years, no servant had ever dared speak his first name. The audacity of it hit him like a slap. He released her wrist and grabbed her jaw instead, forcing her face up toward his. Up close, he could smell her. Cheap soap, the kind sold at dollar stores. Beneath it, something sharper. Adrenaline, fear. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw no fear at all. He saw fury, a rage so deep and controlled that it burned like banked coals waiting for oxygen. Who are you? Dominic demanded, his thumb pressed against her cheekbone. What game are you playing? No game. Her voice remained steady despite his grip. But if you don't trust me in the next 30 seconds, you're going to find out exactly what your wife and your best friend have been planning for months. The mention of Victoria sent a cold spike through his chest. And Dante, his underboss, his brother in everything but blood. How many of Dante's men are outside? Dominic asked, his eyes narrowing. 4 at the main gate, 2 in the garden. And they're not here to protect you. Elena met his gaze without wavering. They're here to make sure you don't leave alive. Dominic's grip loosened slightly. His mind raced. Dante had insisted on extra security tonight. A precaution, he'd said. Just in case. Just in case of what? Elena must have seen the calculation in his eyes. She didn't wait for him to finish. She turned and moved silently toward the door that led to the main hallway. The door that opened toward the living room. She cracked it open. Just an inch. Just enough. Listen, she breathed. And Dominic heard the sound of his world collapsing. The sounds drifted through the crack like poison. Laughter, the musical clink of crystal against crystal, the pop of a champagne cork, and then a voice that Dominic knew better than his own heartbeat. This champagne is divine, darling. Victoria's voice was bright, excited, not the sleepy murmur of a wife waiting for her husband. Finally I get to be a widow. Dominic's blood turned to ice. The plane went down 30 minutes ago. A deep, gravelly bass. Familiar, achingly familiar, mechanical failure, tragic accident. The bodies will probably never be recovered from the Atlantic. Dante Romano, his underboss, his best friend since they were 17 years old, stealing cars in Southie and dreaming of empires. The man who had stood beside him at his wedding, the man who had held his hand when his mother died, the man he would have taken a bullet for without hesitation. That voice, that laugh. 5 years. Victoria's tone dripped with contempt. 5 years of playing the devoted wife to that boring, predictable man. Do you know how much I hated kissing him? How much I wanted to scrub my skin raw every time he touched me? Soon you won't have to pretend anymore. Dante's voice was warm, intimate. Next week, you'll be the richest widow in Boston, and I'll be the new Dawn. Dominic stood frozen in the darkness. His hand gripped the Glock so tightly his knuckles went white. Every word was a knife sliding between his ribs. They were in the living room where he had proposed to Victoria on one knee, his grandmother's ring in his trembling hand, the living room where she had cried and said yes, and he had believed every tear was real. The wine is perfect, Victoria purred. Is this the Chateau Margaux? The 1995. From his private collection. Dante chuckled. He was saving it for your anniversary next month. I thought we should celebrate with it instead. Dominic heard the sound of liquid pouring. The wine he had flown in from Bordeaux. The wine that cost more than most people earned in a year. The wine he had chosen specifically because 1995 was the year they met. What about the accounts? Victoria asked. Already transferred. The Cayman holdings unlocked this morning. Dante's voice carried a note of pride. Your little biometric project worked perfectly. The fingerprint data, the retinal scan you copied while he slept. Genius, my love. Dominic's stomach lurched. The nights Victoria had held his hand while he dozed. The times she had leaned close, studying his face. He had thought it was tenderness. It was harvesting. And the 5 families? Victoria pressed. Handled. I met with them tonight in New York. They've already accepted me as the successor. Dominic's death will be mourned publicly and celebrated privately. Dante paused. The Russians are on board too. Volkov agreed to the new terms. We're splitting the harbor territories 60-40. Volkov, the man who had tried to kill Dominic 8 months ago, the man whose bullet still ached in his shoulder. Partners now. With Dante, Dominic's vision blurred red, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. 20 years of brotherhood. 20 years of loyalty. 20 years of believing he had someone he could trust. All of it. Lies. His finger found the trigger. His body coiled like a spring. He was going to walk through that door and paint the walls with their blood. Dominic shoved Elena aside and lunged for the door. I'm going to kill them both. Right now. His hand closed around the brass handle. The metal was cold against his palm. One turn, one push, and he would see their faces when they realized the dead man had come home. Elena moved faster than he expected. She threw herself between him and the door, her back slamming against the wood with a dull thud, her arms spread wide, blocking his path. Her amber eyes blazed with desperate intensity. And then what? She hissed. You burst in there. You put bullets in both of them. Then what happens? Then they're dead. And 30 seconds later, 4 armed men stormed through that front door. Elena's voice cut through his rage like a blade. You're outnumbered. You're exhausted. You have 1 magazine and no backup. Dominic's jaw tightened. His finger twitched against the trigger. You're supposed to be dead, Dominic. Elena pressed on, her voice low and urgent. As far as the world knows, your body is sinking to the bottom of the Atlantic right now. If you walk in there without proof, without witnesses, Dante will spin it. He'll say you went insane. He'll say you attacked first. I don't care what he says. He'll kill you and call it self-defense. Elena's eyes bore into his. The 5 families already accepted him. Your own people think you're dead. Who's going to believe the raving ghost over the grieving best friend? The words hit Dominic like bullets. She was right. He hated that she was right. His entire organization thought he was gone. His allies had already shifted their loyalty. Walking into that room now wasn't justice. It was suicide with extra steps. Do you want to die like a fool? Elena demanded. Or do you want to live long enough to make them suffer? Dominic stared at her. Really stared. This wasn't the invisible maid who folded his shirts and polished his silverware. This was something else entirely. A woman with steel in her spine and fire in her blood. She wasn't cowering before the most dangerous man in Boston. She was challenging him. Why are you saving me? The question escaped before he could stop it. You could have let me die. You could have walked out of here tonight and disappeared. No one would ever know. Elena's expression flickered. Something dark passed behind her eyes. Something old and heavy and full of shadows. She didn't answer. There's no time, she said instead. We have to move. Now. Before someone checks the kitchen. The silence stretched between them. Dominic's rage still burned hot in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to kick down that door and empty his clip. But he hadn't survived 36 years by being stupid. He lowered the gun. Lead the way. Elena moved through the darkness like she had been born in it. She led Dominic away from the kitchen, away from the living room where laughter and champagne still echoed, through a narrow service corridor that he had walked past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold floor. She knew exactly where every creaking board lay, every loose tile, every shadow that might hide them from prying eyes. 3 years. She had spent 3 years learning every inch of this house, every corner, every secret passage. He had spent 5 years owning it without knowing any of them. The laundry room, Elena whispered over her shoulder. There's a chute that goes to the basement. Dominic followed in silence. Questions burned in his throat, but survival came first. Answers could wait. They slipped into the laundry room. Industrial machines stood like sleeping giants in the darkness. The smell of detergent hung thick in the air. Elena pulled open a square metal hatch in the wall. The laundry chute. You first, she said. Dominic looked at the narrow opening. It would be a tight fit for a man his size, but he had crawled through worse. He holstered the Glock and grabbed the edges of the chute. The metal scraped against his tailored suit as he pushed himself inside. His left shoulder screamed in protest. The old wound flared hot and angry, sending white sparks of pain across his vision. He dropped into blackness. The landing was hard. A pile of dirty linens cushioned the fall, but barely. Dominic rolled off the heap and onto the concrete floor of the basement. A moment later, Elena dropped down beside him, light as a cat. The basement smelled of damp earth and fabric softener. Washing machines lined one wall. Storage boxes filled with holiday decorations and forgotten furniture crowded the rest. This way. Elena was already moving toward the far corner. Behind a rack of old coats and a stack of moldy cardboard boxes, there was a heavy iron door. Dominic had never noticed it before. The surface was covered in rust and cobwebs, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. Storm tunnel, Elena explained, her hands finding the wheel mechanism in the dark. Leads out to the boathouse on the cliff. Built in 1912, in case of hurricanes. How do you know about this? Elena glanced back at him. In the faint light filtering through the basement windows, her expression was unreadable. You own this house, Mr. Castellano. You don't clean it. She gripped the wheel and pulled. It didn't budge. Rust had welded the mechanism nearly shut. She strained against it, her arms shaking with effort, but the wheel refused to turn. Dominic stepped forward. Move. He wrapped both hands around the wheel and pulled. His shoulder shrieked in agony. The scar tissue stretched. Something warm and wet began to seep through his shirt. He didn't stop. With a grinding screech that seemed impossibly loud in the silence, the wheel turned. The iron door groaned open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled of salt and decay. Beyond lay nothing but darkness. A tunnel mouth gaping like the throat of some ancient beast, waiting to swallow them whole. Go, Dominic commanded. Elena stepped into the void. Elena had barely crossed the threshold when the world exploded into light. The basement flooded with harsh fluorescent glare. Someone had flipped the switch at the top of the stairs. Hey! The shout came from above. Heavy boots thundered on wooden steps. Dominic spun around, his Glock already rising. Marco Benedetti stood on the staircase, one of Dante's enforcers. A mountain of a man with a neck like a bull and hands that had strangled the life out of more men than Dominic could count. He was holding a submachine gun. His finger was on the trigger. But his eyes were the eyes of a man seeing a ghost. Boss? Marco's voice cracked. The weapon wavered in his grip. You're dead. The plane. They said Dominic didn't let him finish. 2 shots. Clean. Precise. The silencer reduced the gunfire to muffled coughs. 2 dark holes appeared in Marco's chest. His expression froze in permanent disbelief. The submachine gun clattered against the stairs as his fingers went slack. He tumbled forward. His massive body rolled down the wooden steps, limbs flopping like a broken marionette, until he landed in a heap at Dominic's feet, dead before he hit the ground. For one heartbeat, silence. Then chaos erupted above. Shouting, running footsteps, someone screaming orders in Italian. "The basement! Check the basement!" Dominic grabbed Elena by the arm and shoved her through the iron doorway. "Run!" She didn't need to be told twice. Elena vanished into the darkness of the tunnel. Dominic followed, spinning around to grab the heavy door. The rust-covered iron groaned as he hauled it shut. His fingers found the wheel on the inside and spun it clockwise, locking the mechanism into place. He had barely finished when the first bullet slammed into the other side. The sound was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. The door shuddered with each impact, but held firm. The iron was thick, old, built in an era when things were made to last. More shots, more shouting. "He's in the tunnel! Get cutting tools! Now!" Dominic didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran. The tunnel was pitch black. No light, no air, just the echo of his own footsteps and the smell of salt water and rotting stone. Somewhere ahead, he could hear Elena's bare feet slapping against the wet ground. Behind them, the pounding continued. The door would hold, but not forever. They had minutes at most. Dominic ran faster, chasing the sound of Elena's footsteps into the abyss, the thunder of bullets fading into the distance behind them. The tunnel stretched before them like the throat of a serpent. Dominic ran blind. The darkness was absolute. No light, no sense of direction, only the wet slap of Elena's footsteps ahead and the distant echo of pounding behind. The air grew thicker as they descended. Salt, moss, the unmistakable smell of the sea. Water dripped from the ceiling and pooled beneath their feet. The walls were slick with decades of moisture and decay. Dominic pulled out his phone. No signal, just a useless rectangle of light that illuminated nothing but ancient stone. "How much farther?" he demanded. 50 meters. Elena's voice floated back through the blackness. "The tunnel opens at the boathouse. I live there. The servants' quarters in the main house had mold, so I moved to the loft above the dock 3 months ago. She had been sleeping 100 feet from his bedroom, and he had never known." The tunnel began to slope upward. Dominic's lungs burned. His shoulder screamed with every stride. Ahead, he could see a faint rectangle of gray. The exit. Elena reached it first. A wooden trapdoor set into the ceiling. She pushed up with both hands, and the door swung open with a groan of rusted hinges. Rain poured in. Wind howled. The storm had intensified. They climbed out into the boathouse. 2 black jet skis sat on the dock, covered by tarps that whipped violently in the gale. Beyond the open bay door, the Atlantic Ocean raged. Waves 3 feet high crashed against the rocks. Lightning turned the sky white. "We'll never make it in this," Dominic shouted over the wind. "We don't have a choice." Elena was already ripping the tarp off the nearest jet ski when the boathouse door burst open. 3 men. Tactical gear. Automatic weapons. Dominic fired without hesitation. The first man dropped with a bullet in his throat. The second spun sideways as a round tore through his shoulder. The third dove behind a stack of wooden crates, his weapon spraying wild. Bullets chewed into the walls. Splinters exploded through the air. "Get on!" Elena had the jet ski in the water. The engine roared to life beneath her hands. Dominic squeezed off 2 more shots to keep the third gunman pinned, then sprinted for the dock. He leaped onto the back of the jet ski just as Elena gunned the throttle. They shot out into the storm. The ocean tried to kill them immediately. A wave slammed into the hull and nearly flipped them sideways. Rain hammered down like needles of ice. The wind screamed in their ears. Behind them, spotlights swept across the water from the cliffs. Muzzle flashes flickered in the darkness. Bullets splashed into the waves around them. Elena drove like a woman possessed. She banked hard left, using the shadow of a massive breakwall for cover. She knew these waters. She navigated the treacherous currents with a fearlessness that made Dominic's heart pound. 20 minutes of freezing hell, waves crashing, rain blinding, cold seeping into their bones. Finally, the lights of the Castellano estate faded to a faint glow on the horizon. Elena cut the engine. They drifted into the murky waters of the Industrial Canal in South Boston. Rusted factories loomed on either side. Abandoned warehouses stood like forgotten tombstones. Silence. Just the lap of water against the hull and the distant rumble of thunder. They had made it. The Industrial Canal was a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Rusted factories lined both banks, their broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. Rotting piers jutted into the black water. The smell of diesel and decay hung thick in the air. Elena guided the jet ski beneath a crumbling wooden dock. The boards above them groaned in the wind, but held. They were invisible from the shore. Dominic climbed off first, his legs nearly buckled. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and pain. He turned to help Elena, and stopped. She was shaking. Violent tremors ran through her entire body. Her gray t-shirt was plastered to her skin, transparent with water. Her lips had turned a faint shade of blue. He reached out and took her hand. Ice. Her fingers were ice. "We're alive," Dominic said quietly. Elena looked up at him. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like black tears. Her dark hair hung in tangled ropes around her face. She looked like a drowned ghost, but her eyes, those amber eyes, still burned. "Now what?" she asked through chattering teeth. Dominic smiled, not a warm smile, not a kind smile, the smile of the surgeon, the smile that had made grown men weep and beg. "Now we go find the devil." They walked for 15 minutes through back alleys and abandoned lots. Dominic knew this neighborhood. He had grown up here, before the money, before the power, before he became the man that Boston feared. The boxing gym looked like it had been condemned decades ago. Peeling paint, boarded windows, a faded sign that read Sullivan's in letters that had once been read. Dominic knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. The door opened. Sully stood in the doorway, 73 years old, face like crumpled leather, hands that had trained 3 world champions and buried just as many enemies. He looked at Dominic, looked at Elena, didn't ask a single question. He simply stepped aside and jerked his head toward the back. Sully owed Dominic his life 3 times over, once for a gambling debt that would have cost him his fingers, once for a rival gym owner who had tried to burn him alive, once for a grandson who had gotten mixed up with the wrong crew. Some debts couldn't be repaid with money. The basement beneath the gym was exactly as Dominic remembered, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, a cracked leather couch, a wooden table scarred by cigarette burns, the smell of sweat and old leather. Sully tossed them 2 towels and a bottle of Jameson. Then he threw down a first aid kit and disappeared back upstairs without a word. Dominic peeled off his soaked jacket. His white shirt underneath was stained red. The wound on his arm from the laundry chute had reopened. Blood dripped steadily onto the concrete floor. Elena was beside him before he could speak. She opened the first aid kit with steady hands. "Sit down," she commanded. "Let me see." Elena worked in silence. Her hands moved with precision that surprised Dominic. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, the alcohol burning like liquid fire. She threaded the needle without hesitation. Each stitch was neat, deliberate, professional. Dominic watched her through narrowed eyes. The dim light of the basement cast shadows across her face. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. Her breathing was steady. These were not the hands of a maid. "You have the hands of a surgeon," he said quietly. Elena's fingers paused for just a moment. Then she continued stitching. "I wanted to be a doctor once." Her voice was flat, empty. Before everything fell apart, she tied off the final stitch and cut the thread. Her work was flawless, better than some of the back alley medics Dominic had used over the years. A silence settled between them, heavy, expectant. Dominic's eyes drifted to her wrists. In the faint light, he could see them clearly now, faded scars running horizontally across the delicate skin, old wounds, the kind that didn't come from accidents. "Why did you save me, Elena?" His voice was soft, dangerous, the truth. This time, Elena set down the needle. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. "Because my name isn't Elena Marquez." The words hung in the stale air of the basement. She stood slowly. Her hand reached into the pocket of her wet shorts and emerged with a small black object, a USB drive. She held it between her fingers like a weapon. "My real name is Elena Salvatore." Dominic's blood turned to ice. Salvatore. The name hit him like a bullet to the chest. Marco Salvatore, the man who had controlled the waterfront unions, the man who had been feeding information to the feds, the man Dominic had executed in a warehouse on the docks 6 years ago. He remembered that night. The rain, the smell of fish and diesel. Marco on his knees, begging not for his own life, but for time. Just 5 minutes, to make one phone call, to say goodbye to his daughter. Dominic had said no. Dead men don't make calls. "My father was Marco Salvatore." Elena's voice was steady as stone. "The man you killed in 2019. Dominic's hand moved on instinct. The Glock cleared the table and leveled at her chest before his conscious mind could catch up. His finger found the trigger. The barrel pointed directly at her heart. Elena didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped forward, closer. until the cold metal of the silencer pressed against the wet fabric of her shirt, against her skin, against her beating heart. "Shoot me," she said, her amber eyes locked onto his. No fear, no tears, just a terrible, hollow emptiness. "I've been waiting to die for 11 years. You'd be doing me a favor?" Dominic's finger trembled on the trigger. 11 years. She had been 16 when he killed her father. A child. "But before you pull that trigger," Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you might want to see what's on this." She raised the USB drive between them, "because the man who really destroyed my family isn't you, and he's currently drinking champagne in your living room." Dominic didn't pull the trigger. His finger hovered there, trembling slightly. The gun remained pressed against her chest, but he didn't fire. He needed to know. "Talk," he commanded. "Everything." Elena stepped back slowly. She moved to the couch and sat down, her wet clothes leaving dark stains on the cracked leather. Her eyes stared at something far away, something only she could see. When she spoke, her voice was hollow, detached, like a woman reading her own obituary. "I was 16 when they came for my father." The words fell like stones into still water. "We were in the warehouse on Pier 7. He had brought me to work that day because my mother was sick and someone needed to watch me." A ghost of a bitter smile crossed her lips. "Wrong place, wrong time. Story of my life." She paused. Her hands lay motionless in her lap. They dragged him to his knees. 4 men. He begged them. Not for his life. For 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to call me, to tell me to run. Her voice cracked almost imperceptibly. They said no. Dead men don't make calls. Dominic remembered those words. He had said them himself. The first bullet hit his shoulder. The second went through his chest. Elena's amber eyes were dry, empty. He fell into my arms. There was so much blood. It was warm. I remember thinking that was strange. "I always thought blood would be cold," she swallowed. His last words were, "Run, baby. Run." And then he was gone. Silence. My mother found out 3 days later. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went very quiet. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 months after that, I came home from school and found her in the bathtub. The water was red. So red. Dominic lowered the gun slowly. His arm felt heavy. His chest felt tight. My brother Lucas was 12. They put him in foster care. Different home than me. No one wants to adopt a teenage girl with dead parents and a police file. She laughed. A hollow, broken sound. I aged out of the system at 17. Ended up on the streets. She looked down at her scarred hands. I did what I had to do to survive. Worked in bars where men touched me without asking. Slept in alleys when I couldn't afford a room. Got arrested for stealing food. 8 months in county jail. Her voice hardened. You know what happens to young girls in prison? The things they do to you when the guards look away? She didn't wait for an answer. I almost died from an infection they refused to treat. Would have been a mercy. She stood up abruptly, walked to the small window, stared out at nothing. When I got out, I searched for Lucas. Took me 2 years to find him. Her shoulders tensed. He was living in a crack house in Dorchester, needles everywhere. He didn't even recognize me at first. Her voice broke. He died in my arms. Overdose. He was 23 years old. Tears finally escaped, sliding silently down her cheeks. His last word was my name, just like our father. She turned back to face Dominic. After that, I went to the Tobin Bridge, middle of the night. Climbed over the railing. Her jaw tightened. I was ready to jump. I wanted to jump, but I couldn't. Why not? Because I realized dying was too easy. Too quick. Her eyes blazed with sudden fire. I needed them to pay first. I needed to watch them suffer. She walked back toward him. Stopped 3 feet away. I came to your house to kill you, Dominic. I spent 3 years waiting for the perfect moment, studying your routines, learning your weaknesses, planning exactly how I would watch the light leave your eyes. She held up the USB drive. But then I found this, and everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. Sully kept an old laptop in a locked drawer beneath the boxing ring. Dominic retrieved it without asking. The machine was ancient, thick as a brick, but it still worked. He plugged in the USB drive and waited while the files loaded. Elena stood behind him, her arms crossed over her chest. I found these 6 months ago, she said quietly. When I was cleaning Dante's private office, he thought I was invisible. People like him always do. The first folder contained emails, hundreds of them. Exchanges between Dante Romano and Nikolai Volkov dating back 7 years. Coordinates of shipments, names of informants, schedules of police patrols. everything the Russians would need to undermine the Castellano operation from within. Dante had been selling him out for nearly a decade. The second folder was worse. Audio recordings. Dante's voice, unmistakable, whispering poison into Dominic's ear. Conversations from years ago. Dominic remembered every single one. Marco is talking to the feds. Dom, I have proof. He's been copying our shipping manifests, passing them to the FBI. We have to move now, before he destroys everything you built. Lies, all of it, fabricated evidence, manufactured betrayal. Marco Salvatore had never been a traitor. He had been a loyal man, murdered because Dante needed him gone. Because Marco had been too close to discovering the truth about who was really selling information to the Russians. Dominic's hands began to shake. The third folder contained video. He clicked play and immediately wished he hadn't. Victoria and Dante, in his bedroom, on his bed, the sheets he had slept in just nights before, the headboard he had bought as an anniversary gift, their bodies intertwined, their laughter echoing through the speakers. He's so boring, Victoria gasped between kisses. So predictable. I can't wait until this is over. Soon, baby, Dante murmured against her neck. Soon you'll have everything, and I'll have the throne. Dominic slammed the laptop shut so hard the screen cracked. The fourth folder he had glimpsed contained harbor contracts. Deals already signed with Volkov. Territory Dante had promised to the Russians in exchange for their support in the coup. The fifth folder held schematics, detailed plans for sabotaging a private jet, his private jet, fuel line modifications, timer settings, exact flight paths over the deepest parts of the Atlantic. They had planned his murder down to the minute. Dominic stood up so violently the chair crashed backward. He paced the small basement like a caged animal. His breath came in ragged bursts, his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. 20 years. 20 years he had called Dante his brother. 20 years of shared meals and shared secrets and shared blood. 20 years of absolute trust. And every single moment had been a performance. He had killed Marco Salvatore, an innocent man, a father, because Dante had whispered lies into his ear, and he had believed every word. He was a murderer, but he was also a puppet. Now you understand, Elena said from behind him. Her voice was cold, distant. Now you know how it feels to discover that everything you believed was a lie. Dominic turned to face her. His eyes were wild. His jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Why? He demanded. Why didn't you use this to destroy me? You could have taken this to the feds, to the newspapers. You could have buried me. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Because I wanted to kill you myself. The words hung in the air between them. Raw, honest, brutal. I spent 3 years planning your death, studying the poisons that would be undetectable, practicing with a knife until my hands stopped shaking. She paused. I was going to do it slowly. I wanted you to know who I was. I wanted your last breath to taste like my father's blood. Dominic said nothing. But then I started watching you. Elena's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Really watching. Not just your routines. You. She took a step closer. I saw you pacing the library at 3 a.m, alone, carrying a weight that no one else could see. I saw the way you spoke to the staff, to me, like we were human beings, not furniture. Her jaw tightened. Dante treated us like objects, things to be used and discarded. He grabbed, he threatened, he made the younger maids cry. She shook her head. But you said please, you said thank you. You remembered our names. Silence stretched between them. You killed my father, Elena continued. You pulled the trigger. That's a fact I will never forget. Her voice cracked slightly. But Dante killed him first. He betrayed my father to you. He manufactured the evidence. He whispered the lies that made you believe. She looked down at her scarred hands. You were the weapon, but Dante was the one who aimed it. Dominic stood motionless. The rage that had burned so hot moments ago had cooled into something else. Something heavier. Guilt. Regret. A grief he didn't know he was capable of feeling. I'm sorry. The words came out rough, unfamiliar. He couldn't remember the last time he had apologized for anything. About your father, your mother, your brother. I'm sorry. Elena's amber eyes glistened. Sorry doesn't bring them back. No. Dominic's voice was quiet. But blood can. He moved to the table and sat down heavily. His shoulder throbbed. His head pounded. But his mind was clear for the first time in hours. My funeral is Sunday. 3 days from now. Dante will be crowned as the new Dawn. Every family head in the Northeast will be there to pay respects and pledge loyalty. He looked up at her. What do you want, Elena? Money? A new identity? I can give you anything. Safe passage to anywhere in the world. Enough wealth to disappear forever. Elena shook her head slowly. I don't want your money. Then what? Her eyes hardened into amber steel. I want to look into Dante's eyes when he loses everything. I want to watch his face when he realizes the dead have come back to haunt him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want him to know that Marco Salvatore's daughter is still alive. And she remembers. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then we have work to do. The Irish pub sat on a corner in Southie that hadn't changed in 50 years. Faded shamrocks painted on the windows. A neon sign that buzzed and flickered. The smell of stale beer and old wood seeping through the cracks in the door. At 4 a.m, the street was empty, but the lights inside were on. Dominic pushed through the door alone. He was wearing borrowed clothes, Sully's old leather jacket, cracked and worn, jeans that were slightly too short, boots that had seen better decades. He looked less like a mafia don and more like a dock worker coming off a bad shift. Patrick O'Brien sat in a booth at the back, eating a full Irish breakfast as if it were noon instead of pre-dawn. Eggs, bacon, black pudding, a pot of tea steaming beside his plate. 4 bodyguards surrounded him. Big men, hard eyes, hands that knew their way around violence. Every single one of them drew their weapons when Dominic walked in. Patrick looked up from his eggs. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. His weathered face, crisscrossed with scars from a lifetime of street wars, registered genuine shock. Castellano. His voice was thick with a brogue that 50 years in America hadn't softened. You're dead. Saw it on the news myself. Plane crash. Very tragic. The news lied. Clearly. Patrick set down his fork. His pale blue eyes studied Dominic with the calculation of a predator sizing up potential prey. Give me one reason not to put a bullet in your skull right now. Save myself a lot of future trouble. Dominic reached slowly into his jacket. The bodyguards tensed. Fingers tightened on triggers. He pulled out the USB drive and tossed it onto the table next to Patrick's plate. Because I'm the only one who can stop you from losing $10 million. Patrick's eyebrow rose. He gestured to one of his men, who produced a laptop and plugged in the drive. Dante Romano made you a promise, Dominic continued. Said he'd return the harbor territories to the Irish once he took over. Compensation for the deal I blocked 3 years ago. Patrick's jaw tightened. How do you know about that? Because Dante already sold those same territories to Nikolai Volkov. Dominic nodded toward the laptop screen. The contracts are right there, signed 6 months ago. The Russians take possession the moment I'm officially declared dead. Patrick scrolled through the files. His face slowly shifted from skepticism to disbelief to rage. The color rose from his neck to his cheeks to his forehead until he was nearly purple. That lying bastard. He slammed his fist on the table. The teacup rattled. He swore on his mother's grave. Dante doesn't have a mother. Dominic's voice was cold. He was spawned in a sewer. Patrick looked up. His eyes were hard now, calculating. What do you want? 15 men, stationed outside my funeral on Sunday. Not to fight, just to secure the perimeter. Make sure Dante's guards can't interfere when I walk through those doors. And in return, South Boston. Dominic held his gaze. Every block from Broadway to the waterfront. Yours, permanently. Patrick leaned back in the booth. His eyes drifted toward the door. Elena stood there, silent, still. Her amber eyes reflected the dim lights of the pub. She hadn't flinched when 4 guns swung toward her. Who's the girl? My partner. Patrick laughed. A deep, booming sound that shook the bottles behind the bar. You've got balls, Castellano. Always said that about you. He shook his head. Crazy. But balls. He extended his hand across the table. Dominic shook it. An alliance between Italian and Irish. The first in Boston's bloody history. They returned to Sully's basement as the first gray light of dawn crept through the grimy windows. Elena collapsed onto the cracked leather couch without a word. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed. Her body curled into itself, seeking warmth that the thin blanket couldn't provide. For the first time in 3 days, she allowed herself to sleep. Dominic couldn't. He sat in the wooden chair across from her, his back against the cold wall, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. His mind refused to quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Dante's face, heard Victoria's laughter, felt the weight of all the lies he had believed. His gaze drifted to Elena. In sleep, she looked different. The hardness had melted from her features. The armor she wore so carefully had slipped away. She looked young, exhausted, broken in ways that couldn't be fixed with stitches or bandages. The dim light caught the scars on her wrists. thin white lines running horizontally across the delicate skin. Old wounds, careful cuts. The work of someone who had wanted to disappear. She had stood on that bridge, ready to jump, ready to end it all. But she hadn't. Elena's eyes fluttered open. She caught him staring and tensed immediately, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Then she recognized him. Her shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. "You're not sleeping," she said. Her voice was rough with exhaustion. "No, thinking about how to kill me once this is over?" Dominic almost smiled. "Almost. No, I was thinking about why you didn't jump." Elena sat up slowly. She pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders and stared at the far wall. The question hung between them, heavy and sharp. "Because dying was too easy," she finally said. "Too fast. 1 second of falling and then nothing. No pain, no justice, just emptiness." She turned to face him. "I wanted them to hurt first. I wanted to see the fear in their eyes. I wanted them to know that everything they built was crumbling around them." Her voice hardened. "I couldn't give myself peace until I took theirs." Dominic nodded slowly. He understood that kind of rage. It had driven him for decades. "And after?" he asked quietly. "After Dante pays. After Sunday." "What then?" Elena's expression flickered. Something vulnerable crossed her face before she could hide it. She didn't answer, because she didn't know. For 11 years, revenge had been her oxygen, her reason to wake up, her reason to survive. She had never allowed herself to imagine a future beyond it. There had never been an after. Only the mission, only the pain, only the waiting. Dominic stood. He crossed the small space between them and placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, unexpected. "Think about it," he said softly. "You deserve an after, Elena." Sunday arrived draped in gray. The sky above the Castellano estate hung low and heavy, threatening rain that never came. The air was thick with moisture and mourning, a fitting day to bury a king. The Gothic chapel stood at the edge of the property, its stone spires reaching toward the clouds like skeletal fingers. Stained glass windows depicted saints and sinners in equal measure. The building had witnessed generations of Castellano funerals. Today, it would host the grandest one of all. Black escalades lined the circular drive, dozens of them. Security personnel in dark suits and darker expressions stood at every entrance. The 5 families had sent their representatives. The politicians sent their condolences. The whole underworld had come to pay respects. Inside, white lilies filled every corner. Their sickly sweet perfume hung heavy in the air, mixing with the smoke of incense and the subtle notes of expensive cologne. Candles flickered in iron sconces. A string quartet played something mournful and classical. At the front of the chapel, an empty mahogany casket rested on a raised platform. Closed, of course. The body had never been recovered from the Atlantic. A large portrait of Dominic Castellano stood on an easel beside it. In the photograph, his gray eyes stared out at the mourners with cold authority. Victoria stood at the pulpit. She was a vision of elegant grief. A black Valentino dress hugged her figure. A delicate veil covered her face. In her gloved hands, she clutched a handkerchief that had never touched an actual tear. "Dominic was the anchor of my life," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "My protector, my partner, my everything." She dabbed at her eyes. To lose him so suddenly, so tragically. She paused, letting a sob escape. "It feels as though the sun has been ripped from my sky." The audience murmured in sympathy. Several women in the front rows wiped their own eyes. Victoria's performance was flawless, Academy-worthy. Dante Romano sat in the first pew, directly before the casket. He wore a black suit with a mourning band around his arm. His head was bowed in apparent sorrow, but if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the slight upturn at the corner of his lips. Behind him sat the heads of the 5 families: Gambino, Lucchese, Genovese, Colombo, Bonanno. They had already accepted Dante as Dominic's successor. The transition of power would be formalized today, immediately following the service. Victoria stepped down from the pulpit. Dante rose to take her place. He climbed the steps slowly, his expression grave. He gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the assembled mourners. "Dominic Castellano was more than my boss," he began. "He was my brother. For 20 years, we built this empire together. We bled together. We dreamed together." He lowered his head. "I swear to you all, on his memory, that I will continue his legacy. The Castellano family will be stronger than ever, united, unbreakable. As brothers, I vow to." The chapel doors exploded open. Light flooded in from outside, harsh and blinding against the candlelit darkness. A gust of cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing half the candles and sending lilies scattering across the stone floor. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. The shadow in the doorway didn't move. For 3 heartbeats, the entire chapel held its breath. The string quartet fell silent. The mourners froze in their pews. Even the candle flames seemed to stop flickering. Then the figure stepped forward into the light. Dominic Castellano walked into his own funeral. He wore a long black coat over a dark turtleneck, jeans instead of his usual tailored suit. His jaw was covered in 3 days of stubble. His gray eyes swept across the room like a winter storm, cold and merciless. This was not the polished businessman who attended charity galas and shook hands with senators. This was something older, something more dangerous. This was the man who had clawed his way up from the streets of Southie with nothing but his fists and his fury. Victoria screamed. The sound tore through the chapel like a wounded animal. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed against the nearest pew, her veil falling away to reveal a face drained of all color. "No," she gasped. "No, no, no. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead." Dante's hand flew to his waistband. He pulled out a pistol, but his grip was shaking so badly the barrel wavered in the air. "Ghost!" someone shouted from the back. "It's his ghost! He's alive!" another voice cried. "The Don is alive!" Chaos rippled through the congregation. People rose from their seats. Bodyguards reached for weapons. The heads of the 5 families exchanged sharp glances. "Security!" Dante bellowed, finally finding his voice. "This is an imposter. Shoot him!" No one moved. The doors on either side of the chapel swung open. Men in dark jackets stepped through, their weapons drawn and ready. But they weren't Dante's men. They were O'Brien's. "Your security is being disarmed outside as we speak," Dominic said calmly. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he walked down the center aisle. "Patrick O'Brien sends his regards." Dante's face went white. The gun in his hand trembled. Dominic stopped at the front of the chapel, 10 feet from his empty casket. He looked at the portrait of himself, then at the lilies, then at the faces of everyone who had come to celebrate his death. Behind him, another figure entered the chapel, Elena. She walked with her head high and her shoulders back. Her black suit was perfectly tailored, accentuating every line of her body. Her dark hair was pulled up in an elegant twist. Her amber eyes blazed with cold fire. She was not the invisible maid anymore. She was a queen claiming her throne. She took her place beside Dominic and faced the crowd without a trace of fear. Dominic turned back to Dante, who was still standing at the pulpit with a useless gun in his shaking hand. "I apologize for interrupting my own funeral," Dominic said. His voice carried through the silent chapel like a blade. "But I think everyone here deserves to see something." One of O'Brien's men wheeled in a projector. The screen descended from the chapel ceiling, covering the stained glass window behind the altar. Dominic pulled a remote from his pocket. "Let's start with the entertainment." The screen flickered to life. Victoria and Dante, tangled together in silk sheets. In Dominic's bedroom, on Dominic's bed, their bodies intertwined, their laughter echoing through the chapel speakers. "He's so predictable," Victoria's recorded voice purred. "So boring. I can't wait to spend his money without having to look at his face." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Several of the older dons turned away in disgust. The video cut to audio. Dante's voice, clear and unmistakable. "The plane will go down over the Atlantic. Mechanical failure. Tragic accident. No body will ever be found." Then the emails appeared on screen. Correspondence between Dante Romano and Nikolai Volkov. Shipping routes. Informant names. Territory agreements. 7 years of betrayal, laid bare for everyone to see. The heads of the 5 families rose from their seats. Their faces had turned to stone. Murder was business. Assassination was strategy. But selling information to the Russians, betraying the families to foreign enemies, that was unforgivable. They turned their backs on Dante without a word. Victoria scrambled from the pew where she had collapsed. She crawled across the stone floor on her hands and knees, her designer dress tearing against the rough surface. "Dominic," she sobbed, reaching for his leg. "Darling, please. Let me explain. It wasn't what it looked like. He forced me. He threatened me." Dominic looked down at her. His expression was carved from ice. "Explain what, exactly?" His voice was quiet, deadly. "Why you were discussing new curtains for the bedroom while planning my murder, or why you copied my biometric data while I slept." Victoria's face crumpled. "Please," she wept. "Please, I love you. I've always loved you." Dominic stepped over her like she was garbage on the street. Dante made his move. His hand shot to his ankle, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from a hidden holster. He swung the weapon up toward Dominic's chest. "Die," "You son of a f—" The shot came from Elena. Her hand was steady. Her aim was true. The bullet tore through Dante's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The revolver clattered across the marble floor. Blood sprayed across the white lilies. Dante collapsed, screaming. Elena walked forward. Her heels clicked against the stone with each deliberate step. She stopped directly in front of him, looking down at the man who had destroyed her family. "My name is Elena Salvatore." Her voice was cold and clear. "My father was Marco Salvatore, the man you framed, the man you betrayed, the man whose death you orchestrated so you could climb one step higher." Dante stared up at her through eyes glazed with pain. "Look at where you are now," Elena said softly. "Look at what's left of your empire." Dominic moved to stand beside her. "What do you want done with them?" Elena considered for a moment. "Death is too quick, too merciful." She looked at Victoria, still sobbing on the floor. "Send them to the salt mines in Siberia. I have contacts there who owe the Salvatore name a favor. 40 years of hard labor. No names, no identities. Just endless coal and endless work." Victoria's sobs turned to screams. "Shoot me," she shrieked. "Please, just shoot me." "Not that. Anything but that." Elena smiled. A cold, terrible smile. "Drag them out," Dominic ordered. "If they speak, gag them. If they run, break their legs." 1 week later, the Castellano library was quiet. Dominic stood by the window, watching the Atlantic crash against the cliffs below. The storm had passed. The sky was clear. The world looked different now. Behind him, the door opened. Elena walked in carrying a suitcase. Dominic didn't turn around. "The Swiss account is active. You can go anywhere in the world." "I know." Silence stretched between them. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. "Why haven't you left?" Elena set down the suitcase. She moved to stand beside him at the window. "Because for the first time in 11 years, I'm not running anymore." Her voice was quiet, honest. "Because you're the only person who never lied to me, and because I don't know who I am without the hate." Dominic reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder. He handed it to her. "I don't need another underboss," he said. "I need someone who can see my blind spots. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth." Elena opened the folder. A partnership contract. 2 signatures required for every major decision. "Stay," Dominic said. "Not as a maid, as a partner." Elena studied the document. Then she looked at him. One condition. A hint of something warm flickered in her amber eyes. "The West Wing. I hate that painting in the hallway." Dominic smiled. A real smile. The first in longer than he could remember. "Burn it if you want." Elena set the folder on the windowsill and picked up her suitcase. For a moment, Dominic thought she was leaving. Instead, she placed it by the door and returned to stand beside him. They looked out at the ocean together. 2 broken people. 2 survivors. 2 monsters who had found something unexpected in each other. "I came here to kill you," Elena said softly. "Now I'm going to help you rebuild everything." "That might be the strangest love story I've ever heard." Elena smiled. The first genuine smile in 11 years. And that is how the maid who knew too much became the Queen of Boston. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one holding the gun. It's the one who has been pouring your coffee and waiting. This story reminds us that betrayal can come from those closest to us. But so can redemption. It teaches us that our past does not define our future, and that even in the darkest moments, we can find unexpected allies. Trust is earned through actions, not words. And sometimes, the path to healing begins when we stop running and start facing the truth. What did you think of Elena's transformation? Did Dante and Victoria deserve their fate? Or should Dominic have been harsher? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your feelings from deep within your heart. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and redemption, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads. Give this video a like and share it with friends who appreciate a powerful twist. Thank you so much for watching. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.